until the end of high school. I had no desire to go into cinema. I went to university to study theoretical physics and cosmology, interested in the nature of being and time and what it means to exist, in what sense we exist. And gradually I discovered those were philosophical questions, not precisely physical questions. They were metaphysical questions, and how we perceive the questions themselves is determined by our experience. It's maybe a longer story, but at some point I came across filmmaking as a way of exploring and how we experience the world, and especially nonfiction filmmaking as a way of creating a kind of life practice of exploring not just the universe, but how we perceive and feel ourselves in the universe, how our subjectivity shapes the way we know the universe and know existence and know ourselves. I'm always looking for symptoms. Symptoms that sort of embody, symptoms that fascinate me and that somehow embody an enormous theme or an enormous problem that I'm trying to address. I think the theme that I'm most drawn to again and again and again is denial, is the lie, how we lie to ourselves to justify impossibly wrong ways of living. And I think, for example, with Indonesia, what fixated me on Indonesia all the way back in 2002, 2003, 2004 was encountering perpetrators who were boasting in the most astonishing way, most open, grotesque, surprising way about acts that should be unspeakable.
Kan boleh kan? Boleh ya. Seperti ini tiang, tahu kan? Ini tiang ini diikat kawat.
And I could see that their boasting was, to be honest, deeply fascinating. And that's maybe sounds crude to talk about it in that way, but it was. And I think the reason it was is because inherent in the boasting was this sense that there's a terror that, of course, was there in 1965 when they were committing genocide, that's carried forward into the present in the boasting. You see them boast, and you have this feeling that in a terrible way the killings haven't ended, or at least the genocide hasn't ended, because the perpetrators must still be in power or they wouldn't be talking about this. So the boasting became this profound intersection, on the one hand, of self-deception. How do they convince themselves that what they did was right? And impunity. The fact that the perpetrators are still in power and are using boasting to intimidate a whole society into silence and thereby establishing a regime of fear. But I wouldn't say that in the full 2-hour and 40-minute version of the act of killing, you're dealing with a documentary at all. I would say it's something approaching a kind of, it's something we maybe haven't quite seen before. It's a kind of non-fiction fever dream. It's non-fiction in the sense that everything in it is real, but much of what is real are the fantasies, the stories, the fictions through which the characters, and indeed this whole political regime in Indonesia, understands itself and lives with itself. And so these real stories, real fictions, real fantasies have terribly real consequences. And in that sense, it is that the act of killing for me was a kind of culmination of a journey that first brought me to filmmaking, which was this exploration of how, or it's the first milestone in a journey that brought me to filmmaking, which is this question of how do we perceive the world, and how are we, and in our sense of being, our sense of existence, our sense of the world we inhabit, constituted through the stories we tell ourselves. In general, I think you can extrapolate from that to what maybe is my method, which is to look for symptoms and that fascinate me and follow that fascination, asking questions that are not about how do I put that fascinating thing into a story, but actually, what is it about that thing that fascinates me? What might this symptom be trying to tell us? And then I ask, how can I work with people connected to this to create, almost to like a midwife, massage reality so that it gives birth to those metaphors that are immanent within it. So again, going back to the act of killing, one could do the same with The Look of Silence. I'm creating reality in those films. I'm not going off and making a documentary. I'm not going off and making an observational film where I follow the lives of people who interest me. I'm collaborating with those participants to create new realities that otherwise would not exist and could not exist without the film. In the act of killing, of course, it's the dramatization, the perpetrators' dramatizations of what they've done. In my second film, The Look of Silence, it's these confrontations between Adi, an optometrist, and the men who killed his brother, wherein he tries to get them to take responsibility for what they've done while testing their eyes. And these are events that never would happen without the film, that we're creating for the film, both because I feel that the result will be a kind of metaphor for the problem that I'm trying to explore, a metaphor for that same problem whose symptom I spotted at the beginning of the investigation.
Tolong, ampun Pak, tolong. Itu kan misalnya terusin sambil dia tuh ada yang bisa berteriak langsung. Saya dibunuh Pak, tolong, ampun Pak. Itu kami nggak peduli apanya itu. Tolong. Malah kami pukul lagi dia, kami pukuli lagi dia supaya dia mulutnya karena bisa mempengaruhi pasukan ke kami nantinya.
As I feel more and more perpetrators boasting, I found that they were always. I felt like the imminent metaphor here is that this man, one of these men's death squads, should make a musical, and there were a number of death squad leaders who wanted to make a musical. In fact, in the end, I settled on Anwar Congo and went through that process with Anwar Congo, and the metaphor was not this metaphor. Perpetrators making a musical to celebrate their atrocities was not something that I then pushed them towards. I took a journey that I thought might lead there, and if it doesn't lead there, there would be it would lead somewhere else interesting, and of course that the goal would evolve as the journey would advance, as we would go further, as we would take the journey together. But there's always a sense that there's these metaphors that embody a whole, that embody and make visible a tremendous moral lie, that become a kind of pole star for me, and guide me on that journey. At the same time as it's all about improvising and finding opportunities, which is why it's a kind of long journey. It's a little bit like an explorer. No explorer just sets out on a boat and says, okay, I'm going to go that way and I have no idea what I'm going to find.
Mau kasih anak lagi apa saya? Kamu jangan menghina, mau ngasih anak gini sama saya. Ini yang paling jelek, matanya aja satu. Kalau kamu beli istri yang indah, cantik, ini kau kasih boneka anakmu yang mata celek.
There's a scene in the director's cut of The Act of Killing where Anwar Congo butchers a teddy bear. And it's sort of a stupid idea when I say he butchers a teddy bear, but it's his friend Herman's pretending to be the mother of a child. The bear is standing in for the child. Herman's pretending to be a victim, bribing Anwar, trying to save his life by offering his child, not to kill, but just as a gift.
Hah? Bagus ini. Ini satu penghinaan buat saya. Ini satu penghinaan buat saya.
And Anwar butchers the teddy bear, and it was the most awful thing that I'd ever seen. And I came away from that shoot that night feeling tainted. You know, I never thought of the scenes in The Act of Killing as reenactments. I always thought of them as performances of the present day lies, fantasies, stories, scripts that the perpetrators tell themselves so they can live with themselves. And it's a crucial distinction because reenactment's a technique for illustrating a past which is no longer available to be filmed, or a way of inviting sort of channeling, if you like, emotions from the past into the present for your participants. I thought I wasn't doing that, and I felt I wasn't interested in that. I felt I was trying to, again, illustrate the fictions that underpin impunity in the present. But that evening I went home after this teddy bear scene feeling overcome, overwhelmed, and filthy, tainted, like as though I'd been overcome by a kind of tsunami of shit or sewage. It was a horrible evening, to put it mildly. I felt like, and I think, and I had nightmares that night, and the next day I was afraid of the nightmare, of having nightmares again because I was still upset, so I couldn't sleep, and the next day I collapsed but had more nightmares, and this just went on for 8 months, this cycle of nightmares and insomnia. And to heal from that, I had to take a break. I didn't stop working on the film. That, I think, would not have helped me. Working through the material was my way of working through these feelings, but I had to get out of there after we finished shooting what we had to shoot and take a rather longer break. I think it was 8 or 9 months rather than the normal 3 or 4 to 6 months to pull myself together before I could return. The day when Anwar, at the end of The Act of Killing, is a very important scene where Anwar returned, where I take Anwar back to the rooftop where he took me the first day that I met him. At the beginning of the film, we see him there dancing. At the end, we see him there retching. It's a place where he killed 1,000 people, or claims to have killed perhaps 1,000 people. I don't know. We don't know the exact numbers. It could be 300, it could be 500 killed, but many, hundreds of people. Filming that scene, afterwards, the sense that I was done came to me in a very, very memorable way, which is that I cannot film another frame with this man. And there was even an ethical dimension to it, like it would be cruel. He has gone as far as any human being can be asked to go. He has escaped justice, but he has not escaped punishment. And this is as far as we can go. And then I knew it was time to stop.
Itu yang Bapak bunuh lah, itu sekali potong atau
ada? Sekali aja, mana bisa 2 kali, nggak boleh.
Tapi kenapa dengan Gerwani tadi Bapak potong payudaranya dulu?
Oh iyalah.
Itu Bapak potong dulu? Baru?
Lehernya.
Itu kan udah 2 kali potong.
2 kali potong, mau 10 kali potong, soalnya kalau manusianya masih bandel juga ya.
So in The Look of Silence, actually, something happens that I don't think has ever been attempted before in film, and for a good reason, which is that survivors confront perpetrators while the perpetrators are still in power. That never happens because it's dangerous. And as I mentioned earlier, when Adi said to me he wanted to confront the man who killed his brother, I first said absolutely not, it's too dangerous. And then he explained to me why he wanted to. He said, look, my family's been surrounded by these people for my whole life. He was born after his brother was murdered, so he's much, much younger. And we've been living in terror, in fear, because they've been intimidating us, extorting us, threatening us ever since 1965. And my parents will die like millions of survivors in a prison of fear. The violence has ended, but the fear hasn't. And he actually took out a camera that I'd given him to use as a notebook to look for images that might inspire the making of the second film in one tape. And put the tape in the camera and press play. And showed me the one scene in The Look of Silence that he shot. And it's a scene of his father crawling through his own home, lost. At the end of the film, we see it, and he's calling for help.
Aduh. Aduh. Coba ke dalam kelambu yang buang. Dah pergi.
And Adi said this was the first day my father couldn't remember anyone in the family. We were all together for a reunion. He was raving in this way all day. We couldn't comfort him. And I was just asked to look after him to make sure he didn't hurt himself. I had the camera because I was planning to make a home video of the reunion. And I kept it with me because I didn't want the kids to break it. And it was unbearable watching my dad lost and afraid. And every time we tried to comfort him, he'd just become more afraid and call out in fear. And so, not knowing what else to do, I decided to practice filming as a way of keeping an eye on him, but thinking about something else. It's a very human reaction, actually. But he said the moment he tried to do that, it failed because he realized that he was documenting the moment in his father's life that it becomes too late for him to heal. He said, my dad has forgotten the son whose murder destroyed his life, but he hasn't forgotten the fear. And now he'll never heal. He'll never work through that fear because he can't remember what happened. So he's, like millions of survivors, doomed to die in this prison of fear. And I don't want my children to inherit that from my father, my mother, and from me. And I think if I visit the perpetrators, showing them that if they can just acknowledge what they've done was wrong, we can forgive. And then maybe we can make peace with our neighbors. And he thought the perpetrators would welcome this as a chance to be forgiven by one of their victims' families and to stop the manic and defensive boasting that Adi, in fact, it was Adi who first told me all the way, but long before I met Anwar Congo, that he thought the boasting of the perpetrators was defensive. And he said, they'll stop their manic and defensive boasting. They'll be forgiven by their victim's family, one of their victims' families, make peace with one of their neighbors, and they'll want that. And I owe it to my children as a parent to try. And I was very moved by this, and I went and I talked to my crew, and then they said, maybe it's possible because you're known to be close to the most powerful perpetrators in the country because you made the act of killing. You see, we shot The Look of Silence after the act of killing was edited, but before it had its first screening, at which point I knew I couldn't return to Indonesia safely at all for a long time.
Aku orang melo nggak boleh doakanlah anak cucu dia itu biar payah bales anak cucu dia.
And I warned Adi also before we started. I said, I don't think we'll get the apology for which you're looking. I think that you're coming to the perpetrators, looking at them in this sort of gentle, humanizing way that you look at everybody won't make it easier for them. It'll make it harder because they'll look back at you. They'll have invited you into their homes. They'll look back at you, see you as a human being. Then when you reveal that Ramli was your brother, that they killed Ramli, they'll see Ramli as a human being for a fleeting moment. And by extension, they'll glimpse the horrible possibility that all their victims were human beings. And these are men who've spent 50 years trying to convince themselves that they exterminated communists, yes, but not that they killed human beings. They've tried, that is to say, to dehumanize their victims, and you will rehumanize the victims for them.
Orang yang dipotong juga. Waktu itu.
Tiga.
Kalau abangnya abang dipotong ya maaf lah kan nggak tahu bapak. Emang taunya baru sekarang ya kan? Dulu kan saya nggak tahu si kecil anak-anaknya pun kami nggak tahu.
You know, for me, both my films have sort of metaphors in them that embody the whole. So there's certain images in the film that are not big dramatic scenes, but for me, I'm in love with because they hold the meaning of the whole film. So the film there's a very beautiful moment at the end of the film, I think, where Adi's mother, we see Adi, the film ends with Adi continuing to watch footage of the perpetrators that I filmed, suggesting that his journey, his quest for truth and acknowledgement doesn't end because he's been disappointed again and again. And over that, we hear Adi's mother's voice say,
Nãy giờ lại chết người ta còn
and you think she's talking to the perpetrators that Adi is watching, who are denying every time Adi comes for them. And then we cut to her hand, and we see she's talking to these little jumping beans.
nggak mau bergerak ini. Bila turu, nggak capek. Uletnya nggak cetok, nggak enak uletnya. Aku pengen uletnya, itu uletnya, nggak enak uletnya.
And it's this, for me, this sign of hope, this sense that even after 50 years, there's this sign of life that cannot be extinguished, that's always there. And in The Look of Silence, there was a need to make visible the invisible. Silence and fear are not normally visible. If you walk into an Indonesian village, you might think it's a very cheerful, happy place. And I had to find a language that was visually precise. And I gradually realized that I had to find, because to show something invisible is to show inevitably something subtle. And so you need to film with precision. You have to find the traces of fear and silence that are visible, whether it's in the furrow of Rohani, Adi's mother's brow, or in the water as it flows down Adi's father's emaciated 104-year-old torso while he's having a bath. And so you have to find a language where those tiny details don't become the foreground, but become the like the point of rupture in a frame, the thing that makes you, that in any shot draws your attention, any sequence holds its energy and power. Cinema should always maybe be about making the invisible visible, not just about telling a story or presenting information in the case of a documentary. And the aesthetic should always be about making visible that which is normally invisible.
Ingat po nggak Bidang Ramli.
You have ghosts everywhere, and the light is the pressure of the ghosts. It's the demands of the dead that have been streaming out of that house.
Ingat mo nggak Bidang anakmu.
The father can no longer remember Ramli, and the mother's urging him, can't you remember? Because he's the only one left who knew Ramli. And if the moment he forgets Ramli, she alone holds Ramli. It's memory. It's a moment for me of non-fiction magical realism. And there's moments of that also in the act of killing. I think that, I've come to think that magical realism is maybe the inevitable formal strategy for dealing with mass violence in conditions of total impunity, when the perpetrators win, when there's no justice, when the dead are unburied and the ghosts are abroad. I think there's two books by Marquez that actually my favorite of them, of Garcia Marquez's works by far, is The Autumn of the Patriarch. And maybe The Act of Killing is my film version of The Autumn of the Patriarch. And maybe The Look of Silence, which I like as a film as much as I like The Act of Killing. And I'm haunted and upset and maddened by it just as much as I am by The Act of Killing. But maybe that is closer to 100 Years of Solitude. I'm not saying either, which I like less than The Autumn of the Patriarch. And I'm not saying either of my films achieve the level of those novels in any way. But those are but magical realism has been like a reference point for me throughout my time, because the perpetrators and the survivors relate to the victims through their ghosts. And I think the reason that is because the dead aren't buried. The ghosts are part of daily discourse and daily life.
Jam 3.
Iya, iya, iya. Saya kayak pernah kenal. Kerja di mana? Nggak kerja.
Aku kan kayak kenal sama kakak.
Kenal-kenal ada saudara kita. Orang Jawa kan?
Udah saya mengaji dulu.
Tak maaf lah ya kalau atas kesalahan bapak.
Know that what they're going through on camera will affect who they are. It's not an actor who is at the top of her craft, channeling some magnificent performance, but then will go home to her family, maybe touched by it in the way anyone can be touched by a work of art or participating in a work of art, but ultimately is going to work the next day as the same person. Here we're watching people change, and we're watching people's worlds be reshaped. And that's, of course, why we have tremendous ethical obligations as filmmakers. And it's also why nonfiction is this sacred thing when it's great.
Pak, permisi lagi.
Ya.